Imagine waking up in a hospital bed. The lights are blinding, there are tubes snaking down your throat, and a nurse is leaning over you asking, basic cognitive questions.
Just standard concussion protocol stuff, yeah.
Right. She asks what year it is, and
Yeah.
you confidently say 1998. But it was actually 2002. She asks who the president is. You say Bill Clinton.
Oh, man.
And then she asks for your mother's name. And you lie there for 10 full seconds staring blankly with your mind just totally empty.
That is terrifying.
It is. You literally can't remember the name of the woman who raised you because your brain is swelling against your skull and your body is shutting down its basic functions just to protect itself.
And you're basically hours away from a medically induced coma at that point.
Exactly. So today we are doing a deep dive into how the absolute destruction of a young athlete's life, a catastrophic brain injury on a high school baseball field, ultimately forged one of the most rigorously tested philosophies on human behavior.
Yeah, we're talking about James Clear and the science behind atomic habits. And the physical reality of his injury is just staggering.
Right, because he was hit in the face with a loose baseball bat.
Yeah, struck right between the eyes. The soft tissue of his brain literally slammed against the inside of his skull. It crushed his nose, shattered his skull, and destroyed both of his eye sockets.
Which is just brutal to even think about.
It really is. And I bring it up because when we usually talk about behavior change, we approach it from this place of total comfort, right?
Like wanting to lose 10 pounds or finally clear out your email inbox.
Exactly. But this origin story strips away all that luxury. When you are literally relearning how to walk in a straight line without having a post-traumatic seizure.
Yeah, telling someone in that position to just dream bigger is almost insulting.
It's completely insulting. Just push harder doesn't work when your baseline is 0.
Which is precisely the mission of our deep dive today. We are stripping away all that motivational fluff, because if you're listening to this, you're curious, you value your time, and you already know that white-knuckling your way through a new routine just relying on willpower almost never works.
It basically guarantees failure.
Right. So we are extracting the core mechanics from Clear's philosophy to give you a functional, neurobiologically sound operating manual for your life. We're talking about how tiny, microscopic adjustments compound into massive alterations.
And it really all begins with the reality of what happened when he finally woke up from that coma. Because recovery from a traumatic brain injury is this agonizingly slow study in neuroplasticity.
It's not like a movie montage where he's suddenly back in the gym.
Oh, not at all. When he was finally stable, the damage was so profound that even testing his sense of smell was dangerous.
Wait, testing his smell. Why?
Well, a nurse asked him to blow his nose, right? And the air pressure actually forced itself through the microfractures in his face. It literally pushed his left eye out of its socket.
Oh my God.
Yeah, it was just hanging there, held by the eyelid and the optic nerve. So he spent months dealing with double vision, brutal physical therapy, and just the complete loss of his identity as an athlete.
I really want to focus on that identity loss. Because when he finally returned to baseball a year later, the fairy tale ending didn't happen at all.
No, the sports movie ending did not happen.
Right. He actually gets cut from the varsity team. He gets sent down to play with the sophomores. He talks about sitting in his car and just weeping.
Which is completely understandable. He lost everything.
But here is a critical pivot for us. When he later arrived at college at Denison University, he didn't attempt some massive dramatic reinvention. He didn't try to reclaim his lost glory in one heroic leap.
Because he couldn't. When your baseline has been completely zeroed out like that, massive action is literally a neurological overload.
So what did he do instead?
He exerted control over the absolute smallest, most hyper-local variables available to him. Units of control that seemed almost trivial to an outsider.
Like making his bed.
Exactly. Keeping his dorm room impeccably neat, forcing himself to go to sleep early every single night, starting a really basic weightlifting routine.
On the surface, those do not look like the actions of a future academic All-American.
They don't. But neurologically, he was rebuilding his basal ganglia's capacity for routine. He was proving to himself that he could still govern his own behavior just in these tiny microdoses.
And the compounding effect of that is undeniable. I mean, within 6 years of having machines breathe for him, he was selected as the top male athlete at his university.
He got straight A's, transformed his physical frame. It's incredible.
It's such a stark contrast to society's obsession with the overnight success, right?
Yeah.
We worship the dramatic finish line. But his actual survival depended entirely on making his bed and turning the lights off at 10 p.m.
Because massive success is never a single defining action. It is a long, unbroken chain of tiny, seemingly imperceptible breakthroughs.
Just laying down those neural pathways one by one.
Right. When you perform a small, positive habit, you lay down a faint neural pathway, and every repetition thickens that pathway. It's a process called myelination.
Myelination. That's basically the brain insulating the nerve fibers, right?
Right. Exactly. It insulates the fibers so the electrical signal travels faster, which means the behavior requires less conscious cognitive load over time. He was quite literally rewiring his brain through his dorm room habits.
Okay, I want to scale this up. Because it's one thing to say a single college student used tiny habits to rebuild his life after a personal trauma.
It's very isolated, yeah.
Right, it's a personal crucible.
Right.
But can you take this same philosophy, this obsessive focus on microscopic 1% gains, and apply it to a massive dysfunctional organization?
You absolutely can. And the historical record points directly to the British cycling team in 2003 for the proof.
Oh, this is such a great case study.
Yeah.
Because up until that point, they were essentially the laughingstock of the cycling world.
Laughingstock is putting it mildly. They had endured 110 years of absolute mediocrity, not a single Tour de France victory.
And only one Olympic gold medal since, what, 1908?
Something like that, yeah. Their reputation was so incredibly toxic that top-tier European bike manufacturers actually refused to sell them equipment.
Wait, really? They wouldn't even take their money?
Nope. They literally feared that seeing British riders on their bikes would damage their brand's prestige. That is a staggering level of institutional failure.
So they bring in Dave Brailsford as the new performance director. And instead of firing everyone and demanding a radical new training protocol, Brailsford institutes this concept.
The aggregation of marginal gains.
Yes, the aggregation of marginal gains. The entire strategy was based on isolating every conceivable component of riding a bicycle and improving it by a margin of just 1%.
Because the underlying logic there is that optimizing the glaringly obvious things like cardiovascular endurance or the weight of the bike that only gets you to the baseline of your competitors.
Right, everyone at the Olympics already has a light bike.
Exactly. To actually dominate, you have to find your 1% in the obscure variables. So yeah, they redesigned the bike seats for better ergonomics. They rubbed alcohol on the tires for a slight increase in grip.
But they went so much further than that. They went into biological and environmental variables that absolutely no one else was considering.
Like the electrically heated overshorts?
Yes. To maintain ideal muscle temperature while riders were resting, they brought in specific massage gels and actually tested them to track which one catalyzed the fastest lactic acid clearance.
And this is my favorite part. They even hired a surgeon to come in and teach the riders the optimal medical-grade way to wash their hands.
Okay, let's pause on the hand washing for a second, because to a normal person, that sounds like insane corporate micromanagement. How on earth does washing your hands win a bike race?
It comes down to the math of compound recovery. An upper respiratory infection, or even just a common cold, can severely reduce a high-performance athlete's VO2 max.
So they can't process oxygen as efficiently.
Right. And missing even 2 days of training creates this cascading deficit in their periodization schedule.
Oh, I see.
So by eliminating the transmission of viral infections in the locker room, a British rider might gain, say, 10 to 14 extra high-yield training days a year compared to a French or Italian rider.
Wow. And over a 4-year Olympic cycle, that margin mathematically alters their cardiovascular threshold.
It's huge. And they took that same obsessive control to their environment, too. They figured out the exact specific pillow and mattress density that provided the deepest REM sleep for each individual rider.
And they actually hauled those specific mattresses from hotel to hotel on the road, right?
They did. They also painted the entire inside of their transport truck stark white.
Just to spot dust.
Just to spot tiny specks of dust that might accidentally degrade the aerodynamics of the bike chains. I mean, the level of detail is insane.
But the compounding results were astronomical. 5 years after Brailsford introduced this, they arrived at the 2008 Beijing Olympics and captured 60% of the available gold medals.
60%. And then 4 years after that in London, they set 9 Olympic records and 7 world records.
And they finally broke their century-long losing streak at the Tour de France, winning 5 times in 6 years.
It's the ultimate validation of the system.
But I do need to challenge this 1% math for a second, because the idea of getting 1% better every day sounds amazing on a motivational poster.
Sure, it sounds very self-help.
Right. But in reality, variables in complex systems interact. If you change the bike seat and the tire grip and the sleep schedule, is that truly an aggregation? Or is it just throwing 100 things at the wall and hoping the noise produces a signal?
It's a completely valid skepticism. But the mathematics of compounding apply to human performance just as rigidly as they do to finance.
How so?
Well, if you can mathematically improve by just 1% each day for a year, you don't just end up 365% better. Because of compounding, you end up 37 times better than when you started.
37 times.
Yes. And conversely, a 1% degradation daily brings you almost down to zero. The British cycling team wasn't guessing. They were isolating variables, tracking the data, and letting the interaction of those optimized variables create an exponential curve.
It really reminds me of the airplane trajectory phenomenon.
Oh, the LAX to JFK route. Yes.
Exactly. If you are piloting a flight out of Los Angeles heading to New York City, and you shift the nose of the plane just 3.5 degrees south at takeoff, you don't even notice the change in the cockpit.
Nose literally moves a few feet.
Right. But as that tiny directional shift compounds over thousands of miles, you never see the Manhattan skyline. You end up landing in Washington, D.C.
It's a massive divergence over time.
A bad daily habit is just a 3.5-degree shift in the wrong direction. The terrifying but also empowering truth is that time magnifies the margin between success and failure.
And that mathematical reality forces us to confront a really severe psychological roadblock.
Good.
Well, if the math is so reliable and the airplane analogy makes so much logical sense, why is human nature so fundamentally resistant to the process?
Oh, like why do we always quit?
Exactly. Why, when we start a new positive habit, do we almost invariably want to quit by week 3?
Because we are living in the valley of disappointment?
Yeah.
We harbor this deeply ingrained expectation of linear progress,
We want a one-to-one return on our effort.
Exactly. If I spend 30 days sweating on a treadmill and forcing myself to eat kale, I expect the mirror to reflect 30 days worth of aesthetic improvement.
And it almost never does.
It doesn't. So when I look exactly the same on day 30 as I did on day 1, my brain registers that as a failure of the system, and the motivation just flatlines.
Because the human brain is a predictive engine. It deeply desires an immediate correlation between effort expended and results achieved. But compounding processes are inherently nonlinear.
They start slow and spike at the end.
Right. The most profound outcomes of any compounding curve are heavily delayed. The work you do in the first 30 days isn't failing, it's just being stored.
Let's use the ice cube metaphor to visualize this. Imagine you have a solid block of ice sitting on a table in front of you, and the room temperature is 25 degrees Fahrenheit.
Okay, freezing cold.
Right. You start pumping energy into the room. The temperature rises to 26, then 27, then 28. You are expending massive amounts of thermal energy, but the ice cube remains perfectly solid.
29, 30, 31 degrees, still nothing.
Exactly. From the outside, it looks like your effort is entirely wasted.
But then you hit 32 degrees. And that single 1-degree shift, which, by the way, required the exact same amount of energy as the shift from 26 to 27 degrees, that suddenly triggers a massive phase change.
The ice begins to melt.
Yes. The thermal energy from 25 to 31 degrees wasn't wasted at all. It was creating the latent potential required for the phase change to actually occur.
To bring this into the reality of everyday life, it's exactly like paying down the principal on a 30-year mortgage.
Oh, that is a painfully real example.
Right. For the first 5 years, you are writing these massive checks every single month. But when you look at your loan statement, the balance barely moves because almost all your money is going toward the interest.
You just feel like you're throwing cash into a void.
You're deep in the valley of disappointment. But every payment is quietly building equity beneath the surface. You are storing potential. And eventually the amortization schedule flips. The principal starts shrinking rapidly, and the wealth begins to compound.
That mortgage analogy perfectly illustrates the concept of lagging measures.
Lagging measures, let's define that.
So, the outcomes you experience in life are rarely real-time indicators of your current behavior. They are almost always lagging measures of your past habits.
Give me some examples of that.
Well, your physical health today is a lagging measure of your eating and exercise habits from the past 6 months. Your financial net worth is a lagging measure of your past spending habits.
Even the clutter in your house, right?
Exactly. The physical clutter in your living room is a lagging measure of your past cleaning habits. Ultimately, you get what you repeat.
Okay, but if outcomes are just lagging measures, and we are stuck paying the interest on the mortgage, just sweating on the plateau at 29 degrees, doesn't focusing on the ultimate goal actually become detrimental?
It really does.
Because staring at a finish line that refuses to get closer is a recipe for deep demoralization.
It absolutely is, which requires a complete paradigm shift. To survive the plateau of latent potential, you actually have to stop looking at the horizon. You must completely abandon your goals.
See, that flies in the face of literally every corporate seminar and self-help guru out there. We are constantly told that ambitious goal setting is the prerequisite for high achievement.
I know, but it's a fundamental misunderstanding of mechanics. We really need to rely on the distinction outlined by Scott Adams here.
Goals versus systems.
Right. Goals are about the specific results you want to achieve. Systems are about the daily processes that ultimately lead to those results.
So if you're an author, your goal might be to write a New York Times bestseller.
But your system is the schedule you keep to write 500 words every morning before breakfast. And the objective reality is that goals have 4 major structural flaws.
Let's break those down. The first flaw being survivorship bias.
Yes, survivorship bias is huge. We look at the gold medalists standing on the podium, and we attribute their success to their intense desire to win.
But we ignore the fact that every single runner who finished behind them had the exact same goal.
Exactly. Every runner who didn't even make the Olympic team had the identical goal. So if the winners and the losers share the same goal, the goal itself cannot be the variable that differentiates them.
The differentiator is the system they executed on rainy Tuesday mornings.
Spot on. The second flaw is that goals only offer a momentary change.
Like cleaning a messy room.
Right. Let's say your goal is to clean a chaotic office. You summon a burst of adrenaline, you spend a Saturday organizing everything, and boom, you achieve your goal.
But if you don't alter the underlying system, the sloppy habits that led to the clutter in the first place, you will be sitting in a messy office again in 2 weeks.
You are constantly treating a symptom without ever addressing the underlying pathology. You're just fighting a war of attrition against your own environment.
And the third flaw is the psychological cage that goals create. It's that "I'll be happy when" fallacy.
Oh, we all do this.
We subconsciously tie our self-worth and our dopamine to a future milestone. I'll be happy when I get the promotion. I'll be happy when I lose 20 pounds.
You are perpetually restricting your happiness to an increasingly distant future, whereas a systems-first mentality allows you to derive satisfaction from the execution of the process today. You essentially win every time your system runs.
That's a huge mindset shift.
Yeah.
And the fourth and maybe most damaging flaw is the yo-yo effect.
Right, because goals actually create a hard stop for progress.
Look at marathon runners. They will train with militaristic discipline for 6 months to achieve the goal of finishing the race. But the week after the marathon, a massive percentage of them completely stop running.
Because the goal was the only structural support for the habit. When the goal is achieved, the motivation just evaporates entirely.
It's the difference between playing to win a specific game and playing to keep the game going indefinitely.
Beautifully put. But transitioning from a goal-oriented mindset to a systems-oriented mindset requires rewiring how we view ourselves. It's not just about doing different things.
It's about altering the bedrock of our identity.
Yes. Behavior change basically operates on 3 concentric layers, much like an onion.
Okay, peel the onion for us.
The outermost layer is changing your outcomes. This is the domain of goals. You want to lose weight, win a championship, publish a book.
The results.
Right. The middle layer is changing your processes. This is the domain of systems. You implement a new gym routine, you declutter your desk.
And the core.
The innermost core, the real foundation of sustainable change, is changing your identity. This is what you fundamentally believe about yourself, your worldview, your self-image.
See, most of us approach change from the outside in. We start with the outcome. I want to be rich. And we hope that achieving the outcome will eventually change how we view ourselves.
But identity-based habits work from the inside out. Let's examine the linguistic difference between 2 people trying to quit smoking.
This is such a great example.
So someone offers them a cigarette, the first person declines and says, "No thanks, I'm trying to quit."
Logically, that makes sense.
It does. But underneath the surface, that person still holds the identity of a smoker. They are a smoker who is temporarily attempting to do something out of character. The psychological friction there is immense.
But the second person simply says, "No thanks, I'm not a smoker."
It's a tiny semantic shift, but it signifies a monumental reorganization of their internal reality.
Because smoking is now a relic of their past. It's completely disconnected from their current identity.
Exactly. They don't have to utilize willpower to reject the cigarette because smoking fundamentally contradicts who they now are. True behavior change is identity change.
So the reason so many of us struggle to maintain good habits is because those habits are in direct conflict with the identity we secretly hold.
Precisely. If your underlying identity is, I am terrible with money, no budgeting app in the world is going to override that belief long term. You will subconsciously sabotage your savings to realign your reality with your identity.
This really highlights the danger of the toxic identity narratives we tell ourselves daily. We casually say, I'm just naturally unorganized, or I'm terrible at math.
I have a horrible memory.
Yes. We accept these narratives as biological facts, and then we build systems that accommodate those flaws. So how do we actually rewrite that internal code?
You rewrite it through action. Identity is not just an arbitrary belief you select. It is a belief that is substantiated by evidence.
So every action is a vote.
Exactly. Every single action you take is a vote cast for the type of person you wish to become. You don't just wake up and decide you are a writer, but every time you sit down and draft a single page, you cast a vote for the identity of a writer.
Every time you choose a salad over a burger, you cast a vote for the identity of a healthy person.
Right. And the beauty of the voting system is that it doesn't demand perfection. In any election, you don't need a unanimous 100% of the vote to win.
You just need a strong majority.
You can miss a workout, you can eat a pizza, you can cast a few votes for a bad habit. As long as the overwhelming majority of your daily actions are voting for the positive identity, the new self-image takes root.
Okay, which brings us to the operational mechanics. We understand the necessity of small gains, we understand the danger of goals, and we understand that action shapes identity.
The theory is solid.
Right. But how do we physically architect these actions in a brain that is evolutionarily designed to resist change? To answer that, we have to isolate the neurological structure of a habit.
And the foundational research for this takes us back to 1898 to the laboratory of psychologist Edward Thorndike.
Thorndike's puzzle boxes.
Yeah.
This is such a fascinating glimpse into the primitive learning engine of the mammalian brain.
It really is. So Thorndike built these highly specific wooden puzzle boxes and placed hungry cats inside them. The only way for the cat to escape and reach a bowl of food outside was to trigger a specific mechanism.
Like stepping on a pedal or pulling a looped string.
Exactly. And initially, the cats exhibited completely random, agitated behaviors. They would bite the wooden slats, scratch at the corners, pace back and forth.
They were just throwing chaotic energy at their environment.
Just completely guessing. But eventually, purely by accident, a cat would step on the correct pedal, the trap door would fall open, and the cat would get the food.
And Thorndike recorded the time it took for the escape.
Right. The first few trials, the cats took an average of 1.5 minutes to stumble upon the solution. But as he repeated the experiment, the random behaviors began to vanish.
They stopped biting the wood and started focusing on the pedal.
Because by trial 20 or 30, the behavior was so profoundly internalized that the cats could escape in an average of just 6.3 seconds.
What Thorndike observed was the physical manifestation of what he called the law of effect. Behaviors followed by satisfying consequences tend to be repeated.
And behaviors followed by unpleasant consequences tend to be abandoned.
But neurologically, what was actually happening inside the brains of those cats over those 30 trials?
The cats were undergoing a process called synaptic pruning and strengthening. Initially, the prefrontal cortex, the conscious analytical part of the brain, is highly active, trying to solve a novel problem.
Burning tons of calories.
Exactly. It requires a massive amount of metabolic energy. But once the cat discovers the solution and receives the dopamine hit from the food, a neurochemical timestamp is created.
So the brain says, save this for later.
Yes. As the action is repeated, the brain recognizes that conscious thought is no longer required. It transfers the control of that sequence down into the basal ganglia, which is an older, deeper brain structure responsible for automated routines.
The synapses firing the correct sequence are heavily myelinated.
And the synapses associated with scratching the walls are pruned away.
The brain is actively trying to automate the solution to save energy. And this exact neurological pathway forms the core of every single human habit.
It creates a 4-step feedback loop: cue, craving, response, and reward.
Let's dissect each of those 4 stages. The first stage is the cue.
Right. The cue is a piece of sensory information that triggers the brain to initiate a behavior. It's basically an environmental signal predicting a reward.
Like walking into a dark room. The visual lack of light is the cue.
Exactly. Then the second stage is the craving. This is the motivational engine. And it's crucial to understand that you do not crave the habit itself. You crave the change in your internal state that the habit delivers.
You don't crave flipping a plastic light switch.
No, you crave the sensory relief of being able to see in the room. You don't crave inhaling carcinogens from a cigarette. You crave the dopamine release that soothes your anxiety.
Stage 3 is the response. This is the actual physical or mental action you perform. Flipping the switch, smoking the cigarette.
And the response relies entirely on how much friction exists. If the light switch is broken, or if the action requires more energy than you are willing to expend, the loop breaks.
And finally, stage 4 is the reward. The reward serves two distinct neurological purposes, right?
It does. First, it satisfies the initial craving, providing relief. Second, and more importantly, it teaches the brain.
The dopamine signal.
Right. The release of dopamine signals to the basal ganglia. Remember exactly what you did, where you were, and what you felt right before this happened, because we need to do this again.
Cue, craving, response, reward.
It is an endless, continuous scanning process happening subconsciously every second of your life.
Like when your phone buzzes on the table, that's the auditory cue.
You experience a spike of anticipation about who is contacting you. That's the craving.
You reach out and unlock the screen, the response.
You read a text from a friend and feel a sense of social connection, the reward. Your brain logs the sequence, ensuring that the next time the phone buzzes, you will reach for it without a single conscious thought.
That level of automation sounds terrifying to a lot of people. It invites this massive existential pushback.
People hate feeling like robots.
Exactly.
Yeah.
If we delegate all our daily behaviors to the basal ganglia, don't we become biological robots? Doesn't designing a life around rigid, automated habits completely destroy human freedom and spontaneity?
It is the most common fear regarding habit formation, but the biological reality proves the exact opposite. Automation does not restrict freedom, it subsidizes it.
How so?
The conscious mind, the prefrontal cortex, is a severe bottleneck. It can only process a highly limited amount of information at once, and it burns through glucose rapidly.
So if you're forced to make basic decisions all day.
Right. What time to wake up, what to eat for breakfast, when to pay your utility bill, whether to go to the gym, you are bleeding cognitive capital. You suffer from decision fatigue before you even get to work.
People who have not mastered their habits are often the ones with the least amount of freedom.
Absolutely. If your financial habits are chaotic, you are constantly stressed about money, which restricts your freedom of choice. If your health habits are poor, your lack of energy restricts your physical freedom.
By automating the foundational routines of survival, you free up the cognitive bandwidth required for deep, creative thought. Habits create the scaffolding for freedom.
That's a great way to put it.
So, if we accept that habits are the scaffolding, we need the blueprints. And James Clear maps a practical, four-step operating system directly onto that neurological loop.
The 4 laws of behavior change.
Yes. If you want to build a good habit, you must make it obvious, make it attractive, make it easy, and make it satisfying. Let's start by isolating the cue. Law number 1, make it obvious.
The foundational problem with cues is that our brains are incredibly efficient at making them invisible to our conscious mind. To make a cue obvious, we first have to drag our existing habits out of the shadows of the basal ganglia and back into the prefrontal cortex.
Which brings us to the Japanese railway system.
Oh, this is brilliant.
Japanese trains are renowned globally for their precision and safety. And they achieve this through a remarkably unusual operational protocol known as pointing and calling.
If you've ever seen a video of this, it looks almost theatrical.
It really does.
Yeah.
They constantly point at different instruments and call out their status loudly. A conductor will point at the speedometer and yell, "Speed is 80 kilometers per hour." They will point at the upcoming traffic signal and declare, "Signal is green."
It seems incredibly redundant, but it is a brilliant neurological hack. When a conductor operates a train for thousands of hours, the behaviors become so automated that they stop truly seeing the signals.
Their eyes process the light, but the conscious brain doesn't register it.
Exactly, which leads to fatal errors. Pointing and calling forces the conductor to engage their physical motor skills by pointing, their speech centers by calling, and their auditory processing by hearing their own voice.
It forcefully elevates a subconscious action into conscious awareness.
And it reduces errors by up to 85% and cuts accidents by 30%.
We can adapt that exact protocol for our own lives using a habit scorecard. It requires no judgment, just scientific observation. You write out a chronological list of your morning routine.
Wake up, turn off alarm, check email in bed, go to bathroom, brush teeth, turn on coffee maker.
Then you point and call, categorizing them based on your long-term identity goals. You label them as positive, negative, or neutral. You aren't trying to change anything yet. You are just forcing your brain to recognize the invisible cues dictating your morning.
Once you have established awareness, you can aggressively engineer new cues. And the most effective method is utilizing implementation intentions.
Removing all ambiguity from the cue.
Right, you do not say, I'm going to try to write more this week. That relies on the unpredictable arrival of motivation. Instead, you lock the behavior to a specific time and location.
I will write for 1 hour at 7 a.m. at my kitchen table.
Yes, and the research backing this up is staggering. When citizens are simply asked, are you going to vote? The turnout is average. But when researchers force voters to build an implementation intention asking them, what exact time will you vote and what exact route will you take to walk to the polling station, turnout drastically increases.
Because by mentally rehearsing the specific time and location, they prime their reticular activating system to recognize the cue when the moment arrives.
Exactly. Another highly effective strategy is habit stacking, which leverages a psychological phenomenon known as the Diderot effect.
The Diderot effect. This is the idea that obtaining a new possession often spirals into a chain reaction of consumption.
Yes, like you buy a new couch, which suddenly makes your living room rug look worn out. So you buy a new rug. The new rug clashes with the coffee table, so you replace the coffee table.
Human behavior rarely happens in isolation. Actions dictate subsequent actions.
And Stanford researcher B.J. Fogg utilized this chain reaction to create the habit stacking formula. After current habit, I will new habit. You don't invent a new cue. You piggyback on a neurological pathway that is already rock solid.
After I pour my morning coffee, I will immediately meditate for 1 minute.
After I take off my work shoes, I will immediately change into my gym clothes. The completion of the old habit becomes the undeniable cue for the new one.
But the absolute most powerful lever we have for making cues obvious is environment design. We desperately want to believe that we are the conscious architects of our choices, but the reality is that the physical environment is the invisible hand shaping our behavior.
Let's examine the choice architecture study conducted by physician Anne Thorndike at the Massachusetts General Hospital cafeteria.
She wanted to improve the eating habits of thousands of hospital staff and visitors.
But she knew that lecturing them about nutrition or relying on their willpower would fail. So she altered the geography of the room without saying a single word to anyone.
She observed that the refrigerators located directly next to the cash registers, the highest traffic areas, were stocked exclusively with soda.
Her intervention was radically simple. She added bottled water to those main refrigerators. Furthermore, she placed baskets of bottled water near the food stations throughout the entire room.
She didn't remove the soda.
No, she didn't ban anything. She just made the water physically obvious and highly accessible.
And the behavioral shift was massive. Over the next 3 months, soda sales plummeted by 11.4%, while bottled water sales skyrocketed by 25.8%. Nobody was coerced. Nobody's underlying desire changed. They simply interacted with the most obvious cue in the visual field.
Because vision is the most dominant human sense. Nearly half of the brain's resources are dedicated to processing visual information. If you want to change your behavior, you have to change your visual landscape.
The practical application of this is profound. If you want to practice guitar more, don't hide the guitar in a hard case under your bed. Buy a stand and place it in the absolute center of your living room.
If you want to eat healthier, put a massive bowl of apples right on the kitchen counter, rather than hiding them in the crisper drawer where produce goes to die.
It also requires enforcing the rule of one space, one use. The brain creates intense contextual associations. If you sit on your couch to watch Netflix and to eat takeout and to answer work emails, you are blending the cues.
When you sit on that couch and try to focus on work, your brain is simultaneously firing cravings for television and junk food, creating massive internal friction. You have to separate the contexts. Read in a specific chair, work at a specific desk. When you isolate the context, the habit triggers automatically.
Okay, so we've cleared the friction of visibility. The apple is sitting right there on the counter. But here's the biological roadblock. If the sight of that apple doesn't trigger a surge of dopamine in the brain's reward center, the motor neuron simply will not initiate the movement to grab it.
Visibility alone is insufficient. We have to manufacture desire. Which brings us to the craving stage and law number 2, make it attractive.
To understand how to manufacture desire, we first have to understand how our biological hardware have been hijacked by the modern world. Let's talk about supernormal stimuli.
Nico Tinbergen and the herring gulls.
Yes. The Nobel Prize-winning ethologist conducted this bizarre and brilliant series of experiments with herring gull chicks.
Herring gull chicks have a highly specific, genetically hardwired cue. When they are hungry, they instinctively peck at a distinct red dot on the lower mandible of their mother's beak. This pecking signals the mother to regurgitate food.
And Tinbergen wanted to test the limits of this instinct. He created fake, cardboard models of gull heads with a red dot, and the chicks pecked at them just as enthusiastically.
But then he exaggerated the cue. He painted a red stick with 3 massive white stripes. It looked absolutely nothing like a mother bird. It was completely unnatural.
But the visual intensity of the exaggerated cue short-circuited the chick's neurology.
They went absolutely frantic, pecking at the stick with desperate intensity, ignoring the actual mother birds nearby. They were genetically programmed to respond to a specific stimulus, and an exaggerated supernormal version of that stimulus drove them wild.
And that exact biological vulnerability is being exploited in us every single minute. The modern food industry is built entirely on creating supernormal stimuli.
Human beings evolved on the African savanna, an environment where salt, sugar, and fat were incredibly rare and vital for survival. Our brains evolved to release massive amounts of dopamine when we secured those dense calories.
Today, food scientists engineer the absolute perfect crunch of a potato chip, or the exact dynamic contrast of a chocolate shell melting over a liquid center.
They trigger a dopamine response that no natural food could ever match. It all revolves around how dopamine functions, which is deeply counterintuitive.
Right, because most people think dopamine is the chemical of pleasure. But the groundbreaking 1954 experiment by neuroscientists James Olds and Peter Milner revealed a much darker reality.
Olds and Milner implanted electrodes deep into the brains of rats, specifically targeting the areas responsible for dopamine release. They then gave the rats a lever that would electrically stimulate that exact brain region.
And the rats became hopelessly addicted.
They pressed the lever thousands of times an hour. They ignored food. They ignored water. They ignored opportunities to mate. They would press the lever until they collapsed from absolute physical exhaustion.
Then the scientists altered the experiment. They chemically blocked the release of dopamine entirely. And the behavioral change was terrifying. The rats lost all motivation to live.
They wouldn't eat. They wouldn't move. They just laid there and died of thirst.
But, and this is the critical insight, when the scientists manually squirted sugar water into the rats' mouths, the rats exhibited the physical facial expressions of liking the taste.
The neural pathways for experiencing pleasure were still fully intact. They still liked the sugar. But without dopamine, they completely lacked the desire to seek it out. They didn't want it.
Dopamine is not the neurochemical of reward fulfillment. It is the neurochemical of reward anticipation.
When you see a cue, a bakery, a notification icon, your brain spikes dopamine in anticipation of the reward. And that spike is what physically propels you into action. The wanting centers in the human brain are vastly larger and more powerful than the liking centers. Desire drives behavior.
So if we want to build a difficult habit, like doing our taxes or running on a treadmill, we have to artificially engineer a dopamine spike. We have to bundle the habit we dread with a habit we genuinely crave.
Temptation bundling.
Exactly. The classic example is Ronan Byrne, an engineering student in Ireland. He knew he needed to improve his cardiovascular health and ride an exercise bike, but he only wanted to binge-watch Netflix.
So he hacked the electronics of a stationary bike, writing a software program that linked the pedaling speed to the video playback. Netflix would only play if he maintained a certain RPM on the bike.
The moment he slowed down, the screen paused. He forced his brain to associate the agonizing effort of cycling with the immediate dopamine release of his favorite shows.
But engineering our personal dopamine isn't always enough, because we are highly social primates. Our desires are heavily dictated by the tribe.
We possess a profound evolutionary drive to fit in, because on the ancient savanna, being exiled from the tribe meant certain death by starvation or predation.
We unconsciously imitate the habits of 3 specific groups. The close, which is our family and friends, the many, which is the general consensus, and the powerful, those with status and prestige.
Imitating the many is arguably the most terrifying because it overrides our own objective reality. Let's revisit the famous Solomon Asch conformity experiments from the 1950s.
Asch brought a single test subject into a room filled with several other people who were secretly actors working for the experiment. Asch projected a simple image of a single line, and next to it, 3 comparison lines of different lengths.
And he asked everyone in the room to state aloud which of the 3 lines matched the original.
It was an incredibly simple, obvious visual task, but the actors were instructed to unanimously choose a line that was blatantly incorrect.
So the test subject is sitting there, looking at the lines, knowing the group is wrong. But the pressure of the tribe is overwhelming.
In nearly 75% of the trials, the test subjects ultimately caved and agreed with the deliberately wrong answer, doubting their own eyesight just to avoid standing out.
The neurological stress of defying the group triggers the brain's pain centers. If you want to make a positive habit highly attractive, you have to manipulate this evolutionary quirk.
You must join a culture where your desired behavior is the normal behavior. If you surround yourself with people who read heavily, reading suddenly becomes an attractive marker of trouble belonging.
If you join a cycling club, waking up at 5 a.m. in the freezing rain to ride 40 miles isn't insane. It's the shared ritual of the tribe. You bond over the shared identity.
But we also have to confront the internal tribe, the dialogue in our own heads. How do we reprogram our internal narrative when we dread a necessary habit?
It requires a cognitive reframing, shifting the narrative from an obligation to an opportunity. And you can do this by changing a single word in your internal vocabulary. Replace "I have to" with "I get to."
You don't say, I have to cook dinner for my family tonight, which frames the act as a domestic burden. You say, I get to nourish the people I love.
You don't say, "I have to wake up early to go to work." You say, "I get to wake up early and build a career." You are altering the emotional valence attached to the cue, shifting it from dread to gratitude.
That sounds beautiful for positive habits, but let's push back on the dark side of law number 2. What about deeply entrenched addictions?
Right. How do you make something like chain smoking or binge eating junk food unattractive when the habit literally mainlines a massive hit of biological dopamine straight into your receptors? A semantic shift like "I get to" isn't going to stop a nicotine craving.
You're absolutely right. To dismantle a bad habit, you have to invert the law. You must make it unattractive. And to do that, you have to ruthlessly deconstruct the underlying motive of the craving.
Clear points to the methodology of Alan Carr for this, whose book, The Easy Way to Stop Smoking, has helped millions quit.
Carr's approach is wild because he doesn't use scare tactics. He doesn't show pictures of blackened lungs.
Because fear doesn't dismantle desire. It just causes stress, which often triggers the smoker to seek a cigarette for relief. Instead, Carr systematically destroys the logical fallacies the smoker believes.
Smokers think they need a cigarette to socialize. Carr points out that smoking actually forces you to leave the social gathering to stand outside in the cold alone.
Smokers think a cigarette calms their nerves. Carr breaks down the neurochemistry, proving that nicotine withdrawal actually creates the baseline anxiety.
And smoking simply returns you to the normal, relaxed state that a non-smoker feels constantly. He reframes the habit so comprehensively that the smoker realizes the cigarette provides absolutely zero value.
When you destroy the illusion of benefit, the craving evaporates.
All right, so we've placed the cue in plain sight, we've hijacked our dopamine to make the craving attractive, but we hit a physical wall.
If the action itself requires Herculean effort, if it feels overwhelming, the brain will instantly seek an easier path. We must reduce the friction. Law number 3, make it easy.
To master this law, we must first confront the dangerous illusion of being in motion versus taking action. They sound identical, but neurologically, they are opposites.
There is a brilliant anecdote about a photography professor at the University of Florida who inadvertently proved this. On the first day of class, he divided his students into 2 distinct groups.
The left side of the room became the quantity group. Their grading rubric was brutally simple. They would be graded solely on the sheer volume of photographs they submitted. Produce 100 photos, you get an A. Produce 90, a B.
The right side of the room was the quality group. Their requirement was the opposite. They only needed to submit a single photograph for the entire semester.
But to earn an A, that single photograph had to be a masterpiece of composition, lighting, and perfection.
At the end of the semester, the results were entirely counterintuitive. You would expect the quality group, having spent months obsessing over a single frame, to produce the best work.
But every single one of the most stunning, technically brilliant photographs came from the quantity group.
Because the quality group fell into the trap of motion. Motion is reading 3 books on diet philosophy. Action is eating a healthy meal. Motion is outlining a business plan for 6 months. Action is making the first sales call.
The quality group spent the semester theorizing about lighting, debating lens apertures, and seeking perfection. They were in motion, which feels like progress, but is actually a sophisticated form of procrastination driven by the fear of failure.
The quantity group was taking action. They were out in the field, shooting terrible photos, messing up the lighting, developing the film, learning from their mistakes, and shooting again. The sheer volume of messy repetitions honed their skills.
We get stuck in motion because it protects our ego. But the biological pathway of a habit is only strengthened through physical repetition, not theoretical perfection.
This relates directly to the thermodynamic reality of human biology, codified as the law of least effort. Our brains evolved to conserve energy at all costs, because on the ancient savanna, expending unnecessary energy could lead to starvation.
When confronted with two similar options, the brain will always automatically gravitate toward the option that requires the least amount of metabolic output.
It's why doom scrolling on a smartphone is a global epidemic. It requires virtually zero physical or cognitive friction.
Precisely. So, to build a difficult habit, we must practice addition by subtraction. We have to engineer our environment to remove the friction.
Look at the industrial triumph of Japanese television manufacturers in the 1970s. They absolutely decimated American manufacturing dominance, not by inventing new technologies, but through obsessive friction reduction.
They redesigned their factory floors to eliminate any wasted movement. If a worker had to awkwardly twist their torso to grab a tool, they moved the tool bench. They optimized the physical flow of energy.
To apply that to our personal lives, we have to look at the garden hose analogy. Imagine you have a garden hose with a sharp kink in the middle, stopping the flow of water.
Most self-help advice tells you to turn up the water pressure, to watch motivational videos, pump yourself up, and force the water through the kink with sheer willpower.
But that requires immense, exhausting pressure, and eventually the valve breaks. Making a habit easy is simply walking over and unbending the hose. You remove the friction, and the water flows naturally with minimal effort.
The most potent psychological tool for unbending the hose is the 2-minute rule. When you are attempting to establish a new habit, you must aggressively scale down the behavior until it takes less than 2 minutes to complete.
Read before bed becomes read one single page. Fold all the laundry becomes fold one pair of socks. Run 3 miles becomes tie my running shoes.
I know, practically, this sounds ridiculous. If you tell an ambitious professional that their new goal is to read 1 sentence a night, they will feel insulted. They'll think, that's not going to make me smarter or change my life.
But they are missing the neurological purpose of the exercise. A habit must be firmly established in the basal ganglia before it can be optimized. You have to standardize before you can optimize. You cannot improve a habit that does not exist.
The point of reading 1 page isn't the intellectual gain of that specific page. The point is mastering the art of showing up.
It's about casting the identity vote.
Exactly. If you have a terrible day at work, you're exhausted, and it's raining outside, you aren't going to go to the gym for an hour. But if you have trained yourself via the 2-minute rule that your only requirement is to show up, lift 1 weight, and leave, you can still execute the habit.
You didn't build any muscle that day, but you protected your identity as an athlete. You kept the neural pathway from degrading.
Okay, so the hose is unbent. We saw the cue, we felt the dopamine craving, and we made the action so ridiculously easy that we couldn't fail. The brain executed the response.
But here is the final, crucial puzzle piece. How do we convince the brain that the energy expended was worth it? How do we close the loop so the brain decides to do it again tomorrow? This is law number 4, make it satisfying.
The reward phase is critical because it dictates the future. To understand the power of a satisfying reward, we have to look at a brilliant public health intervention from the 1990s. Stephen Luby, an epidemiologist, traveled to the impoverished neighborhoods of Karachi, Pakistan.
The health crisis there was dire. Massive rates of infant mortality due to diarrhea, respiratory infections, and highly unsanitary conditions.
And the frustrating part was that the residents generally knew that hand washing was important for hygiene, but knowing something logically rarely changes behavior. The habit of consistent hand washing simply would not stick.
Because washing your hands with the harsh, unscented utility-grade soap, usually distributed by aid organizations, was an entirely neutral or mildly unpleasant experience. It felt like a chore.
So Luby partnered with Procter & Gamble, and instead of handing out standard aid soap, they introduced premium Safeguard soap into these neighborhoods.
This soap was highly engineered. It had a wonderful premium fragrance. It lathered beautifully into a rich foam.
And that sensory upgrade changed everything. The act of washing hands suddenly became a deeply pleasurable, immediately satisfying experience. The fragrance and the physical sensation of the lather provided an instant reward to the brain.
Because the behavior was instantly satisfying, the habit stuck. The rates of disease plummeted incredibly rapidly.
It's the exact same psychological mechanism Wrigley utilized in the 1890s. Chewing gum used to be made of bland, tasteless resins. It wasn't popular. Wrigley added spearmint and juicy fruit flavorings, providing a clean, satisfying mouthfeel, and chewing gum became a global phenomenon.
But this reveals a massive evolutionary mismatch that torments modern humans. Our biology dictates that a reward must be immediate to register.
Yes. For hundreds of thousands of years on the African savanna, humans lived in an immediate return environment. Every action you took delivered a clear, instant outcome.
You hunt an animal, you eat today. You find shelter, you survive the storm tonight. You run from a predator, you live to see tomorrow. The brain's entire reward architecture is optimized for immediate payoffs.
But over the last few centuries, we have constructed a delayed return environment. Almost nothing we do today yields an immediate biological reward. You sit in a cubicle and work on a spreadsheet today, but you don't get a paycheck for 2 weeks.
You put money in an index fund today, but you don't experience the reward of retirement for 40 years. You eat a salad today, but you don't look thinner in the mirror until next season.
We are operating savanna hardware in a Wall Street world. And this evolutionary mismatch generates the cardinal rule of behavior change. What is immediately rewarded is repeated. What is immediately punished is avoided.
This explains the entire geometry of bad habits. The reward of a bad habit is immediate. You eat a glazed donut, the sugar hits your bloodstream, and you get an immediate dopamine explosion.
The cost of the donut weight gain, lethargy, insulin resistance is delayed for months or years. The brain heavily discounts delayed costs in favor of immediate pleasure.
And good habits suffer from the exact opposite geometry. The cost of a good habit is born entirely in the present. Going for a grueling 5-mile run is physically punishing right now. The reward, a strong cardiovascular system, is delayed for decades.
So if our biology naturally sabotages long-term planning, how do we hack the system? We have to artificially attach an immediate satisfying reward to the end of a difficult habit.
Visual measurement is one of the most effective ways to manufacture immediate satisfaction.
Let's look at the paperclip strategy. Trent Deersmid was a 23-year-old rookie stockbroker working at a bank.
His job was grueling, making cold calls to strangers all day long. To survive the rejection, he engineered a visual reward system. He placed 2 glass jars on his desk every morning. One jar contained exactly 120 paper clips. The other jar was empty. Every single time he finished a sales call, regardless of how terribly it went, he reached over, picked up one paper clip, and dropped it into the empty jar. He didn't stop dialing until all 120 paper clips were moved.
Hearing that tiny clink of the paperclip hitting the glass provided an immediate, tangible hit of satisfaction. He wasn't waiting for a commission check at the end of the month. He was receiving a micro reward every 3 minutes.
He could physically see his progress accumulating. Within 18 months, he was generating $5 million in revenue for his firm.
This is the exact psychology behind habit tracking. Jerry Seinfeld, the legendary comedian, used a massive wall calendar. Every day he sat down and wrote jokes. He took a thick red marker and drew a massive X over that date.
The visual chain of red X's grew longer and longer, and the immediate reward wasn't the quality of the jokes. The reward was simply not breaking the chain. The golden rule of habit tracking is, never miss twice.
Missing once is an accident, a biological misfire. But missing twice is the beginning of a new, destructive neural pathway. If you break the chain, you must rebound immediately to protect the identity vote.
However, we have to issue a severe warning regarding tracking, captured brilliantly by Goodhart's law.
Goodhart's law. When a measure becomes a target, it ceases to be a good measure.
When you begin tracking a habit, the brain's dopamine system can become obsessed with the metric rather than the underlying purpose of the habit.
If your goal is holistic health, but you only track your weight on a digital scale, the number on the scale becomes the ultimate target. To optimize that specific number, you might engage in destructive crash dieting, starving yourself, and ultimately ruining your health.
You optimize the metric, but destroy the system. You must ensure you are tracking a metric that aligns with the broader identity, like tracking your daily energy levels or your hours of deep sleep, rather than just raw weight.
Now, what about the inversion of this law? We talked about making good habits immediately satisfying. But how do we guarantee the destruction of a bad habit? We have to make it immediately unsatisfying.
The brain learns from pain just as quickly as it learns from pleasure. If you want to eliminate a bad habit, you must attach an immediate, undeniable cost to it. Because the long-term threat of lung cancer isn't immediate enough to stop a smoker today, you need a present-moment consequence.
The habit contract is a phenomenal mechanism for this. It weaponizes our deep evolutionary fear of social rejection. Brian Harris, an entrepreneur, needed to lose a significant amount of weight.
He didn't just make a private promise to himself. He drafted a formal, legally formatted contract with his wife and his personal trainer. The contract explicitly detailed his daily caloric intake and his required sprint workouts.
But the brilliance was in the immediate penalties. If he failed to track his food, he had to immediately hand his trainer $100. The financial pain was instantaneous.
But the social pain was even worse. Harris was a die-hard fan of the Auburn University football team. His contract stipulated that if he missed his sprint workout, he was required to dress up and go to work wearing the hat of their most hated rival, the Alabama Crimson Tide, for the entire day.
It sounds comedic, but neurologically it is devastating. It is immediate, public, psychological torture. As social primates, we care deeply about our status within the tribe.
Knowing that an accountability partner is watching, and knowing that failure results in an immediate loss of social standing or financial resources, forces the prefrontal cortex to override the basal ganglia's desire for the bad habit.
Okay, let's step back and look at the entire architecture. We have the four-step loop. Make it obvious, make it attractive, make it easy, make it satisfying.
If you execute this system, your habits will eventually become heavily myelinated, deeply automated, and effortless. But this leads to a dangerous paradox. Once a habit becomes truly effortless, how do we sustain it over a lifetime without losing our minds to boredom?
This is where we reach the ultimate plateau of mastery, and where we must introduce the Goldilocks rule. Humans experience peak motivation when they are working on tasks that are balanced perfectly on the edge of their current abilities.
If a task is too difficult, you experience severe anxiety and quit. If a task is too easy, you experience severe boredom and quit.
Boredom is the silent killer of compounding. When a habit becomes fully automated, the brain stops paying attention. You slip into mindless repetition. You think you are gaining mastery because you are practicing every day, but without conscious engagement, you are actually just reinforcing your subtle errors on autopilot.
This is why the integration of reflection and review is mandatory. Automation without reflection leads to stagnation. Look at the 1986 Los Angeles Lakers. They were arguably the most physically talented roster in NBA history, but they had just suffered a humiliating collapse in the finals.
Coach Pat Riley didn't implement a radically new playbook. He instituted a system called the Career Best Effort Program, or CBE.
Riley realized that the players had become bored with their own excellence. They were operating on autopilot. So the CBE program tracked an astonishing array of microscopic statistics down to the minute. He didn't just look at points scored. He tracked unsung hero deeds. How many times did a player dive on the hardwood for a loose ball? How quickly did they transition on defense?
Riley established a baseline CBE score for every single player, and then he demanded a 1% improvement. But the crucial element was the review. He made the data agonizingly public. He constantly compared a player's current performance to their past scores and to the scores of their rivals.
By injecting deliberate reflection into their automated habits, he forced them back onto the edge of their abilities. He cured their boredom with data. The Lakers went on to win back-to-back championships. Mastery requires combining automated habits with deliberate, conscious practice.
And as we synthesize this entire philosophy, it echoes one of the oldest philosophical puzzles in human history. The Sorites paradox, also known as the paradox of the heap.
Ancient Greek logicians posed a simple question. If you have a single coin, does that make you a rich person? Obviously not. But what if you add a second coin? Still no. A third? No.
But if you relentlessly continue adding one single coin, at some undefined point, a threshold is crossed, and you are forced to admit that the person is now unequivocally wealthy. The paradox asks, which specific coin made them rich?
The answer is that no single coin did it, but the aggregation of all of them made it inevitable. Atomic habits are those individual coins. Meditating for 60 seconds tomorrow morning will not grant you enlightenment. Putting one apple on your counter will not cure disease.
But these microscopic actions are the foundation of a compounding curve. You continually rotate through the four laws to keep the curve accelerating.
It becomes a diagnostic tool.
Yeah.
If you're failing to start a habit, you diagnose the cue, make it more obvious. If you're procrastinating endlessly, you diagnose the craving, make it more attractive.
If you find the action exhausting, diagnose the response. Make it radically easy. If you keep quitting after a week, diagnose the reward. Make it immediately satisfying. Success is never a finish line you cross. It is an endless rotating system you perpetually refine.
Which leaves you, the listener, with a final diagnostic question for your own life. Think back to the airplane on the runway. Look at your daily routines, the automated behaviors you perform without thinking. Which of your deeply ingrained systems currently has a 3.5-degree error in its flight path? Which invisible habit is slowly steering you toward the wrong destination? And more importantly, using the neurobiology we've uncovered today, what is the absolute smallest 2-minute adjustment you can physically execute tomorrow morning to begin correcting the trajectory?
A molecular shift today dictates your ultimate reality tomorrow.
Find your 1%, unbend the hose, and cast your vote. We'll catch you on the next Deep Dive.